deep within the archives of the Magnus Institute, an unconventional organization dedicated to researching and cataloging the esoteric and weird, dark things are stirring. An odd figure beckons drunken pubgoers into an alleyway, never to be seen again. A meat grinder somehow compels its users to merrily feed it their own limbs. A late-night subway train burrows itself into the earth, all but crushing its lone occupant. For 200 years, the Magnus Institute has quietly collected statements like these from people of all walks of life, detailing their personal experiences with the supernatural. Your organization is dedicated to cataloging and researching these incidents, but it's becoming clear they aren't as isolated as they first appear. There are connections between them, connections that suggest existential dangers to the world as we know it. How will your team combat them when simply coming to understand these dark forces threatens to bring you under their influence? Because when you stare into the archives, something stares back. This is a review of the Magnus Archives role-playing game. Let's dive in. And here we have the Magnus Archives role-playing game by Monty Cook in association with the Rusty Quill. Two things about the Magnus Archives RPG. First, it's based off the podcast of the same name, where an archivist works for an organization that investigates supernatural happenings through audio logs. This podcast is very much steeped in horror, and that's the sort of vibe you should expect when playing this game. Second, this game uses the cipher system by Monty Cook. If you're familiar with it, then you already know what to expect. You do not need the cipher system core rulebook to play this game though. The Magnus Archives RPG has everything you need to play. In this review, I'll provide an overview of character creation, core gameplay mechanics, and running the game with my final thoughts at the very end. Of course, timestamps will be at the bottom. Towards the end of the book, we have a page on the 9 easy steps to character creation. First of all, it's really only 7 steps, but oh well. First, we're going to grab a pencil and blank piece of paper to record our choices. Then we're going to choose a descriptor in Chapter 2. Then we'll choose from one of 4 types, which are our classes, and those include Investigator, Protector, Elocutionist, and Occultist. Your type is going to determine your starting stat pools, and that's where you're going to kind of allocate those points here in this step. Next, we'll choose a focus on Chapter 4. We'll choose our equipment in Chapter 5. And if we haven't finished assigning points to our stat pools like we should have done way before, then we'll also do that in this step. Then we're going to tell the GM how many ciphers we can have, and they're going to tell us what ciphers we start with. And then we'll choose our starting character arc, and that's pretty much it. Now, your character is defined by a simple statement. I am an adjective and noun, who, verb. To fill the statement, we have descriptors, types in the character's focus. A character descriptor influences everything your character does. They can be bold or brave, muscular or smart. Each descriptor provides an increase to a stat pool, a skill in which you're trained in, a suggested second skill with a suggested inability if you take the second skill. You do not need to take a second skill though. In addition to the character description, we have skill descriptors. Task roles are made easier if a character is trained or specialized in a skill that matches the task. Next, we have a character's type. This essentially serves as a character class, and there's only 4 of them. Each type has 6 tiers, or levels if you will, and each tier has their own selection of abilities to further help flesh out your character. First, we have the Investigator. Investigators are smart, perceptive people. They're more likely to overcome a challenge using their wits than by other means, and occasionally their curiosity or persistence can get them into trouble. Investigators serve as the core of the team, as investigating is so much of what the PCs do in the Magnus Archives. As previously mentioned though, they can get into trouble and sometimes need someone to protect them or help them talk their way out of a bad situation. When it comes to solving mysteries or delving into a topic, they lead the way. We have the Protector. Protectors are physical, action-oriented people. They're more likely to overcome a challenge using force than by other means, and they often take the most straightforward path toward their goals. Protectors usually take and deal the most punishment in a dangerous situation. Often, it falls on them to protect the other group members from threats. This sometimes means that protectors take on leadership roles as well, at least in combat and other times of danger. We have the elocutionists. Elocutionists are smart and charismatic. They like people and, more important, they understand them. This helps elocutionists get others to do what needs to be done. The elocutionist is often the spokesperson of the group, serving as the one who speaks for all and negotiates with others. Combat and action are not an elocutionist's strong suits, so other characters sometimes have to defend them in times of danger. And last but not least, we have the occultist. Occultists are intelligent, well-educated people. They can be mysterious and brooding, their minds on dark topics or shattered with too much sinister knowledge. In the world of the Magnus Archives, the occult is always a subject of dark, fear, and the forbidden. It's never pleasant or hopeful. The occultist is along because they likely know more than the others about what the group is getting involved in. They're probably not a fighter or a people person, but more like an investigator. However, the clues and evidence they find is often of a very different nature. Your focus is what makes a character truly unique. Do they go around carrying a gun? Do they run away or solve mysteries? Each focus is different. Some provide additional equipment, such as a starting weapon with carries a gun. Each has their own selection of abilities you acquire when you reach that tier. The last thing you'll add to your character is their arc. Fulfilling your character arc is the main way you'll be earning experience points. Anytime a character furthers their character arc, they gain XP. If they should ever complete their arc, you'll have to spend 1 XP for another arc, if you don't already have one. You can actually buy a new arc at any time. The Cipher system, and thus the Magnus Archives RPG, is based on a roll over d20 system. You roll a single d20, and if you beat the task's difficulty number, then you succeed. This is where the Cipher system's ingenuity begins to shine. You see, the difficulty of a task ranges from 0 to 10. This simple number tells the players how hard a task is, but is not the actual target number you need to beat for dice rolls. To figure that out, you simply multiply difficulty by 3. For example, for a difficulty 6 task, you'll need to roll an 18 or higher to succeed. Where things really get interesting is how players interact with this number. Players do not add bonuses to their dice rolls. Instead, they decrease the difficulty of a task if they have a skill or something on hand that makes the task easy. This is called easing the task, and this is what players will use to make those higher 7+ difficulty tasks manageable. By the way, if you ease the difficulty of a task to 0, then it is now routine and you automatically pass. If you roll a 19 and succeed on a roll, not only do you succeed, you gain a minor effect as well. If you roll a 20 and succeed, you get a major effect. This is left up to the GM to decide what the effect is, by the way. Things are a little bit different in combat, whereas a 19 through 20 will still get you an effect, but rolling a 17 through 18 also deals 1 to 2 extra points of damage. The opposite is rolling a 1, which leads to a complication called a GM intrusion. Characters have access to 3 stats, also called stat points. We have might, speed, and intellect. Might defines how strong and durable your character is. The concepts of strength, endurance, constitution, hardiness, and physical prowess are all folded into this one stat. Might isn't relative to size, instead, it's an absolute measurement. An elephant has more might than the mightiest tiger, which has more might than the mightiest rat, which has more might than the mightiest mundane spider. Speed describes how fast and physically coordinated your character is. The stat embodies quickness, movement, dexterity, and reflexes. Speed governs such divergent actions as dodging attacks, sneaking around quietly, and throwing a ball accurately. It helps determine whether you can move farther on your turn. Nimble, fast, or sneaky characters will want good speed stats, as well as those interested in ranged combat. Intellect determines how smart, knowledgeable, and likable your character is. It includes intelligence, wisdom, charisma, education, reasoning, wit, willpower, and charm. Intellect governs solving puzzles, remembering facts, telling convincing lies, and using mental powers. characters interested in communicating effectively, being learned scholars, or wielding supernatural powers should stress their intellect stat. Each stat will have an edge. When you need to use an ability that requires an edge, you'll be spending these points. Then there's effort. This is kind of like a backup tool for when you really want to accomplish something. If you want to increase the chances that you can do something, you'll spend 3 points from the relevant stat pool to ease the difficulty of the task by 1. If you spend 5, you can ease it by 2, and for 7 points, you can ease it by 3. However, most beginning characters will only have an effort of 1, meaning you can only ease the difficulty by a maximum of 1. Something else that may help players influence the difficulty of tasks are ciphers, which are a staple of the system. Ciphers are single-use abilities that the GM hands out. A character can only hold a certain number of these. They are supposed to reflect a character's state of mind or the whims of fate. Think inspiration from Dungeons & Dragons, only there are specific times when a character can use them based on the trigger, and instead of giving you an extra die to roll, there are more effects depending on what the cipher is. It is, of course, possible for characters to suffer damage. The first way is stress. This is one of those games where actual injuries are reserved for when really bad things happen, and anything before then is dealt as stress. For every 3 points of stress, or 1 level of stress, all of your actions become hindered. That means instead of easing the difficulty by 1, it increases by 1. More serious damage is dealt as serious injuries, and there are 4 steps. We have hail, which means you're fine. You're impaired. Every time you apply effort, it costs you 1 additional point from the stat you are using. There's debilitated, which is a critically injured state. A debilitated character may not take any actions other than move, which is probably a crawl. And then there's dead, which is dead. Rest does allow you to reduce stress and recover lost points in your pools. You reduce your stress by 3 points for each hour you rest. To get back points in a pool, you need to make a recovery roll, which is a 1d6 plus 1 points per tier. The amount of time you need to rest to make a recovery roll depends on how many recovery rolls you've already made during that day. To heal a seriously injured character, at least from impaired or hurt to hail, is a task that requires an hour and has a difficulty of 6. If you're hurt more than that, you should probably seek professional medical attention at a hospital or something. Combat against monsters is a deadly endeavor. Anyone who plans on going toe-to-toe with a supernatural entity and actually come out unscathed has probably never played any number of horror RPGs such as Call of Cthulhu. Hopefully, you have a plan, if you meet one of these many creatures in this book. Combat with other humans, such as gangsters and mobsters, can also be a thing too, and while they may or may not have weapons, at least they won't sculpt your body into a new form. Initiative is done by making a speed roll. Anyone who rolls higher than the difficulty of the monster, which is monster level times 3, gets to go before said NPC. Anyone who rolls under goes after. Of course, you are playing with other players, hopefully, and have access to some cooperative actions. These are things like helping, which eases the difficulty by 1 step, 2 if you're trained or specialized in a skill. You have distract, which hinders a foe by 1 step. Draw the attack and take the attack, which allows a character close by to take a hit for another, usually at the cost of taking extra damage. And that's pretty much it. The GM assigns a difficulty for a task, whether in or out of combat, and the players roll a d20 to beat it. One unique aspect of the Magnus archives that actually made it into the game are these statements. In the podcast, the story is revealed through statements, usually from someone who was there. In the game, the GM collaborates with the players to create a statement, and thus the beginnings of an investigation. In simplest terms, one player begins by creating a name and a background for the statement's author. A different player takes the reins next and builds whatever they can given the previous information. You keep passing the torch to the next player until everyone has had a turn. I really like this system of collaboration, but it also requires a lot of buy-in from your players. If you have more than one player who's just not interested in that sort of thing, then the method doesn't work as well. If you're going to run any game, then you're going to need some NPCs for your players to go toe-to-toe with. The Magnus Archive has quite a few, and not all of them are monsters. We have some animals such as cat, cougars, coyotes, dogs, guard dogs, horse, rats, and great white sharks for some reason. Okay. But we also have generic people, like an armed henchman, mugger, police officer, private investigator, a blue-collar professional and a white-collar professional, a security guard, and a store clerk. For those who have listened to the podcast, will note that there are stats for some of the characters. While I wouldn't exactly use those specific characters in your game, given how the series ends, or maybe do, it's your game, you can still repurpose their stats into new characters. In fact, that's what this system suggests. If you need to create a new monster, take something that already exists and tweak it a little bit. Some might have a problem with this method. It seems lazy at first that you can just say that something like the Invisible Man can do such and such, and really, it's because it can potentially break the balance of the game. For a game steeped in horror, however, this works because your PC should never really be able to go toe-to-toe with a monster they are not prepared for. These monsters, if they are to be beaten, require planning in order to get the better of them. Some of my favorite NPCs in this chapter alone include the anglerfish, or my favorite is the actual bone turner. You also have things like the book collector and the jigsaw lady. These are all fun additions, and they're not just your typical, Call of Cthulhu type monster or your horror staple. These are actually really unique. In addition to a full stock of NPCs, you're going to find artifacts and books, extra and rare selections to really spice things up. Of course, you do not need to use any of these, but if you can fit them into your story and your players do not know the stories behind them, all the better. Running the game, or game mastering. Most core rulebooks have them. These chapters usually serve as advice columns for would-be GMs. This chapter, the one in this game, is one of the best I've read through. It's more like a guide to good game mastering. Inside we'll find advice on the GM's role in the gaming group, how to determine task difficulties, what to do with intrusions, and how to determine who gets them. I really like that there are sample intrusions as well, and also how to promote the usage of ciphers. There's also more advice on creating NPCs and monsters that is a little bit more detailed than the blurb that we got in the NPC section. This is definitely one of the more detailed chapters on running a game that I've come across, and it works well because it's the cipher system. It's very wordy and very specific. All the system agnostic information can just be its own book based on how relevant it is for new GMs. And here we've come to the adventures. Spoiler warning, if you are a player planning to play through these adventures, turn back now or your bones will liquefy in your body. Like Harry Potter in the Chamber of Secrets. You know the scene, the one where Lockhart tries to mend his bones and you get to see Harry bend half his forearm backwards. Yeah, that'll happen to you, so turn back now. We have two beginning adventures, the Resurrection Mound and Liquefy. In the Resurrection Mound, the PCs investigate the Jong family who have discovered a strange nest in their garden. The insects of the nest are able to bring the dead back to life, pretty much as zombies. Worse yet, a pair of servants of the corruption, one of the horrific entities of the Magnus Archives universe, are trying to protect it for some strange ritual. It's about as basic as you can get. The PCs have a clear target from the get-go, although the reason the Jong family came into contact with them is a little iffy because they are so protective of the resurrected father. But it does give way to some interesting drama. The family wants to protect the zombie, and the zombie wants to protect them. Then there's the insects that the PCs will have to exterminate. Let's just say Big Queen Mama doesn't play around. And then on top of that are Beacon and Howe, who want to exploit the nest for their entity's own needs. There's room for investigation, combat, and weirdness, and it makes for a very good first adventure. For GMs though, this will require a balancing act of knowing who's who and what their quirks are, when to let things happen, and when to introduce other set pieces into the adventure. Still, the book does a great job in preparing the GM for this role, and newcomers shouldn't have too much trouble with it. Liquefy is another beginning adventure, but more so for experienced players. So, a great second adventure if you've already played through the first one. It also makes use of one of my favorite creatures, the Sculptor. Like the Bone Turner, if you let it touch you, you're in for a bad time. It's kind of like Scar from Full Metal Alchemist. The adventure this time around is a little bit more complex as you're given a certain premise that the characters are expected to investigate only to be led on a goose chase to different suspects. The PCs are looking into the murder of Timothy Dunn. When they get to his house, they discover a strange old man trying to get in. He's looking for a book called The Bone Turner's Tale. It happens to be in his father's grave. The old man is a sorcerer, and now you can see where he might be the villain, but no. He did not murder Timothy. He's just looking for the book for reasons. The real killer is the sculptor. Basically, the PCs go to one area, find a clue to the next, rinse and repeat until they encounter the sculptor. And that's kind of it. In my review of the Cipher System Core rulebook, I classified character creation as being high in its complexity, mainly because there's a lot of choices and it's up to the GM to really make it clear what is available and what isn't. With the Magnus Archives, the choices are somewhat limited and more manageable, but that's also where I feel let down, if that makes any sense. There are only 4 types or classes, and if you have players like mine, then they don't really like to overlap in that sort of regard. For those that only play with like 3 or 4 people, that isn't really so much of an issue. But what if you play with 5 or 6? The issue is somewhat lessened with the descriptors and the focus, but if 2 characters pick the same type, then their core identity is going to be the same regardless. Also, I absolutely hate the character creation cheat sheet. I do appreciate that it's at the back of the book and easy to find, but that thing is just way too wordy. Just give me a simple bullet point of what to do and where to go, and that's it. I don't need this whole blurb that explains it. That's what the chapters are for. Something else that I kind of take issue with is the order of the content, at least regarding character creation. Take chapter 2, for example. We're supposed to pick a character descriptor, but the descriptors that are right there at the very beginning of that chapter are skill descriptors, and that's not what we're picking. We're actually picking the character descriptors that are in the middle of the chapter. Character arcs is another example, and I feel like it's in a bad part of the book. It comes after the rules of the game, but for the most part, you're going to need this information for character creation. So it would have been better just to have that before the rules of the game, where all your character creation stuff is anyways. These are just little nitpicks, but little nitpicks do add up. Gameplay is super simple, and I think that is one of this system's strengths. Determining the target number is very easy. You just determine the difficulty level and then multiply it by 3, and there you go. Monsters and NPCs have a level associated with them, and you just multiply that number by 3 for anything that they do, whether it's a character defending from an attack or if a character is trying to hit said monster or NPC. You use the same number, usually, for those instances. This makes it easy for new players and, dare I say, new GMs. In terms of the actual gameplay and mitigating the difficulty of the game, we do have ciphers, which is an interesting tool. I like that there are quite a number of them in this book, and you can even create your own. That's very easy. You could even use some of the ones from the cipher system as well. My only complaint in this regard is that the GM is expected to always be handing these out to the players. I'd rather these be something that players find as a reward or something like that, but then again, if you actually read the descriptions of the ciphers, it makes sense that way, so why am I complaining? For those not used to the cipher system, it may seem like there is a lot to unpack here, and yes, there is. There's a bunch of little systems put into place, and most of those are to help keep the difficulty in check, such as the ciphers. Edges are simple enough, but did you remember that if you get a stats edge up to 3, then you could actually apply 1 level of effort for free? That's a little rule that's tucked in there. Speaking of which, effort and applying it will probably take some getting used to. This is one of those games where I think having a cheat sheet for your players and definitely a GM screen would be very beneficial. Now, despite how wordy it is, the chapter on running the game is one of the better ones that I've read. It's very specific and it covers just about anything that a new GM is going to need to know. And that's not just things that are in the Cypher system. I really like that they've paid attention to things like player dynamics and, keeping the pace going and things like that. You could just take that chapter and just make a little book on that and sell that. And I would say just use that for just about any role-playing game that you're going to be running. The NPC and monster list is very well rounded. And I think any fan of the podcast is really going to get a kick out of what's included in here. But make no mistake, just because it's in the podcast doesn't mean that the monsters and NPCs in this book are going to act the same way. And really, they kind of explain that in the lore section, but if you know, then you know. The adventures included in the book are a great place to start if you're a newcomer. Even players that have been exposed to the podcast should have a bit of fun with it. I like Resurrection Mound more than I like Liquefy, but honestly, I like the monster in Liquefy a lot more than the Queen Bee and Beacon and Howl. I still highly recommend it for anyone who is new to the Magnus Archives and to the Cypher system. Who is this book for? First and foremost, it's for anyone who's a big fan of the podcast. That much is obvious. There's a lot that fans of the series will connect to. And if you've never listened to the podcast, you definitely should do that. At least a couple of episodes. Just fast forward through the ads. Spotify kind of does that weird thing now. And even if you don't listen to the podcast, the chapters with the lore information is actually really good. And will get you up to speed in no time. The Cypher system is definitely an intriguing system. It's more of a narrative game in my book, and I like that. The system lends itself really well to solo play as well. Although I wouldn't recommend it, at least not with something that's horror and investigative. Tried that with Vaesen once and I just didn't really like it. But you could do it. If you're already a fan of the Cypher system and you're looking to run something that's in the horror genre, then I would definitely recommend the Magnus Archives. And if that's not your jam, then you might try The Old Gods of Appalachia, which is another horror podcast anthology, very much like the Magnus Archives. Well, that's going to do it for this video. Feel free to leave a comment down below. Give this video a huge thumbs up to support this series, and I will see you guys in the next video.